I want to welcome you to our expert breakout sessions for Mobile IT Summit, and this is the session for Feed Henry by Red Hat. And with us this morning is Cathal McGloin, Vice President Mobile Platforms at Red Hat. Cathal, thank you for coming. Welcome to Mobile IT Summit.
Thanks, Vance. Good to be here.
You know, we're really glad to have Cathal with us this morning. He's responsible for Red Hat's mobile business and in pushing the Feed Henry by Red Hat platform to be an open source cloud-based mobile application platform for the enterprise. He has led the spin-out and commercial launch of Feed Henry, which started in 2010. And even prior to that, he was quite a out-of-the-box thinker when it came to entrepreneurism. He's had successes in telecom and performance management and serves on several startups and their board of directors. In his session this morning, Evolving Today's Organization for Mobile Excellence, Cathal gives us a view of the 4 most crucial takeaways for mobile excellence. He'll also give us a look at the Feed Henry mobile application platform and the features that are helping IT and developers get an enterprise-class mobile architecture to deliver mobile excellence repeatably and reliably. And most noteworthy to me, he's going to also bring us some great user success stories. Just a quick reminder, you can download Cathal's slides by clicking the button under the viewing area. You'll also see in that same region that he and his team have brought some great PDF downloads and other material in the breakout room. They're available for you right now. And we love to make this interactive where we can. So to connect with Cathal, just type in the Submit a Question box. And now, Cathal, let me hand it to you. Tell us about Evolving Today's Organization for Mobile Excellence.
Thanks, Vance. So today I'd just like to explore just some of the mobile disruptions and some of the trends that are happening that we're all very aware of, and some of the challenges facing organizations as they move on this path towards mobile excellence. The key part of the presentation will be what we think are some 4 important things to think about in building that mobile strategy. We'll use some case studies, some live examples of how we've helped customers that we think are really doing an excellent job. We'll explore Feed Henry by Red Hat platform. We'll give you a brief overview of the product, and then we'll finish with some questions and answers. So let me begin with what's sort of happening in trends. There's no doubt we're in the early stages of quite a fundamental technological change, driven in part by the emergence of smartphones, all sorts of connected devices, cloud deployment, and big data, just to name a few. And as a result of all of those things, the demands in IT are becoming more and more urgent. We're seeing more immediate demands because everything's happening in real time. Demands are more pervasive because technology is everywhere. We're expected to be on everywhere. We're getting data from everywhere. And demands are more aware. We're getting a lot more contextually aware information, just driving up huge, significant amounts of information. And all of these are impacting the technology of IT, the processes of IT, and even the people and the skills of IT. So this is sort of the background to it all. And diving into sort of mobile specifically, we're seeing big change in how organizations are thinking about things. We're seeing an emergence of shadow IT with some 38% of total IT spending anticipated to be outside the formal IT budget. And we're seeing a big move away from what we call the old systems of record, or all those transactional systems that IT have been investing in and building and supporting for years and years. We're seeing a big shift away from an emphasis on those systems to an emphasis on systems of engagement. And what we mean by that is it's a move from the back-end systems to the front-end systems. And that's really been enabled by the emergence of these smartphones as the predominant way in which we want to consume this information, by the emergence of these sensors in these devices to add context to this information. And so really what we're seeing is an unlocking of this information, and the focus is shifting in terms of investment, in terms of priorities, from that back end sort of to that front end. And as a consequence, we're seeing backlogs of apps within organizations, with many companies wanting to develop a lot more than they're capable of doing today. So if we look at sort of some of these other mobile disruptions, we've put it into a comparison of the traditional approach versus the mobile way of doing things. Again, that system of record was what the traditional systems were really all about, whereas today in the mobile world we're really worried about or focused on the system of engagement. Traditionally, applications have been very large, very expensive, big monolithic solutions, whereas the mobile app of today distinguishes itself because it's small. It probably only has one or two features. It's very nimble. It's only focused on doing one thing or two things really, really well. Traditionally, we've looked at the traditional IT as being developing requirements and spending time getting everybody's input and building these requirements, whereas in the new way, we're really focused on the user and doing it much, much faster, less focused on documenting things and more focused on trying it out and seeing. We're moving from long development cycles to much faster speed to market. Our expectations of how long software should take has changed completely because we think of apps and we think how quickly they can be built, developed, and updated, and we're used to that. We've gone from an asset-centric security around the laptop or the server. We've gone to a user-centric, where it's really about the user and the user of that device. And we've got more affordable. Again, people's expectation of how much software should cost has changed as the consumerization of IT is beginning to take effect and move into the enterprise. And updates, everybody now is used to continuous updates on their phone. They're used to that app being updated automatically every 3 or 4 months. And so we've moved away from those planned, scheduled updates to more of a continuous development and deployment model. So these are some of the disruptions that are going on. So against this background, what we want to talk about are 4 key things that really organizations should be looking at as they develop their mobile strategy. So 4 things that are really important to success in building a mobile excellence. The first one is architecture. The second one we're going to talk about is two-track IT, and we'll explain what two-track IT is, or sometimes called bimodal IT. Third, we're going to talk about collaboration and the power of collaboration. And then finally, we're going to talk about simplicity, about how getting it right and doing it really excellent can be about simplifying things rather than putting too much into it. So first of all, let's start with architecture and the importance of architecture. Probably the most obvious and significant thing is in a mobile world is that we've gone from an environment where all of the devices were behind the firewall and working on the organization's internal network to one where many of the devices are actually on public networks and trying to access systems that are behind the firewall. So we've got to think about moving from that web-centered architecture where we had a DMZ and where we have a web server mediating requests to a mobile architecture where we've got to make devices on the public network talk to devices behind the firewall on a private network. So that's fundamental, significant change in the architecture there. And the second big change is agility. The pace of business is just getting faster and faster. Business are expecting more agile organizations, and therefore IT has to become more agile. And that means that the architectures that we deploy, and it needs to support a more agile method of launching and doing things. And so we'll look at some of the things that will help this, things like cloud and platform as a service, allow us to bring agility into the traditional development and operations life cycles. And again, it's an architecture thing that will drive this. We're seeing data volumes go through the roof. We're seeing as these devices, not only are they the preferred method of consuming information, but they're also creating information. We're creating brand new information because that phone has a sensor, it has a camera, it can capture a signature. We're seeing connected devices in the home. We're seeing connected devices in the industry from the old machine-to-machine world now producing huge volumes of data. And so we need to think about the architecture of how to handle that data and how to search it and how to index it and so on. So we're seeing the data volumes and new database architectures emerge, and so they need to feed into the architecture as well. And of course, security needs to permeate everything. We're so aware today of the importance of security. We see it on the front page every so often. Some organization hasn't really thought it through. And we need to think new ways of dealing with security. We need to think about, is it really the same way that In the past, we've built a wall around our domain. Is that the right way to do it, or should we think about security rather than building that fortress and defending it in military parlance? Do we need to think about new kinetic ways, new ways in which perhaps we secure the data rather than the assets? So we need to think about new ways of doing things. And above all, things are moving so fast, we've got to future-proof the investment. There are so many tools and so many new applications out there today, and new, more emerging every day, that no sooner have we selected one particular technology than it can be outdated within a matter of weeks and months. So we need to think about choosing the right things to future-proof our investment. So from our experience, here's what we think some of the most important elements of a mobile architecture and what they include. First of all, there's a big shift towards open technologies. That's right across the board. It's one of those fundamental shifts that have been going on over the last sort of 4 to 5 years. Government in the US now mandates that it should be open technologies. And so we see all of the large companies like Google and Facebook all release open source technology that they've been using for years, release it into the public domain. And so open technology is something that we need to think about in building these architectures. Secondly, cloud is becoming more and more important as these architectures, both in terms of allowing that agility to take place, but also in terms of how we create these applications and how we consume them. And SaaS services are becoming very common in organizations now. Many companies have got over their reluctance to put things in the cloud. Or we can have hybrid cloud models where some of the data can exist in a private cloud that may run partially behind the firewall. What's very important in mobile architecture is the ability to have flexible deployment using a variety of toolkits. In the early days, we saw arguments about whether it should be native or hybrid or HTML5. In reality, the industry has settled down and understood that they need all types. They need the ability sometimes to develop using native toolkits, sometimes to develop using hybrid toolkits, and sometimes to develop using HTML5 toolkits. So any architecture should be able to support all these different toolkits. REST APIs are becoming what we like to call the coin of the realm. It's how things talk to each other. It's the way in which we create an open, scalable architecture is by everybody adhering to the concept of a REST API. And that's becoming probably one of the most significant architectural trends over the last few years. So again, think about that when building an architecture. JavaScript becoming increasingly popular, and specifically Node.js as a server-side technology, both for new web loads as well as for mobile. Node is a lightweight integration language. It's very easy to adopt, very lightweight, has this non-blocking I/O, and so it's very powerful and built on Google's Chrome engine. So again, we're seeing this emerge as a very important part of any good architecture. Mobile backend as a service are a set of out-of-the-box features that speed up the development of client-side apps because the development of certain functions has already been done. So things like push notifications or caching or data sync between the device, those problems have been solved, and so developers can just use those APIs to build faster, better apps. And then we're seeing the NoSQL database helping that massive amounts of data has been generated from these Internet of Things. NoSQL databases like MongoDB are becoming very popular as a way of storing this often unstructured data and producing it in a format that can be consumed by mobile. And then above all, continuous development, continuous integration, continuous deployment, and products like Git becoming very, very important in the architecture. So these are some of the things that mobile architecture should include. So ThyssenKrupp is one of the top service technology companies for servicing elevators worldwide, and they moved recently from an on-premise, an older architecture with proprietary technology, and they moved into a cloud-based architecture. One of their first challenges was they had to, first of all, try and rebuild their initial app that all of the service techs use in the field. They wanted to rebuild that first just to see if they could replicate in the new technologies what they had been using for years in the old technology. And they were pleasantly surprised at how fast they could actually replicate it. But what surprised them even more was the rate then at which they could launch new applications into the market. Initially, there was some trepidation about moving from on-premise into cloud, but once they understood and realized that instead of having two IT people to support and maintain a system, they could free up those resources and focus them on building solutions that the business wanted. They fully embraced the cloud and became one of the big proponent of it. So again, a good example of somebody where once they had the right architecture in place, could move away from the old paradigm of managing software and systems and technology to actually being agile and launching apps that the business wanted. So the second key takeaway is the idea of two-track IT. This is the idea that IT organizations move from where we were 10 years ago to where we are today, and that means moving from Java and .NET frameworks to more polyglot, lightweight frameworks, moving from a web-centric applications to more mobile-centric applications, moving from a waterfall methodology to more agile methodologies, moving from physical and virtual servers to more cloud now, moving from service-oriented architecture to microservices. As we move from what was the past to the present, we see that, yes, those systems did serve us well, and they're still very important as we need to maintain and manage the systems of record, the transactional systems, the ERP systems that run our business. But actually, we also see the benefit of having a second track, which allows us to operate in a more lightweight, agile manner, mobile-centric. So this idea that organizations perhaps need two tracks within their IT, one to maintain the old, and the second to actually introduce agility and to deal with the new. And so Gartner talk a lot about this. They call it bimodal IT, and it's beginning to pick up pace within organizations as they understand that maybe in launching a mobile app factory, they need to bring in new talent, people with new skills, perhaps keep them in a separate unit from the traditional IT so that they can adopt new policies and new ways of doing things and not be hampered by old standards and waterfall methodology and so on. So this idea is, again, becoming increasingly important, and it's something that organizations should think about. So making it a reality, there's certain things that need to be thought about. First and foremost, it's a skills and mindset. There are different skills needed between the old building heavyweight Java applications and the new lighter weight. But there's a mindset between that old, let's gather requirements and spend 3 months documenting it versus let's just build something, throw it out there and get some feedback on it. So there's definitely a skills and mindset difference, so it's important to recognize that. The development methodologies, as we said, are different. Again, it means training people on things like Agile and Scrum. The technologies themselves are different. It may mean sort of retraining or bringing in new people with these new skills. And above all, it's very much a collaborative culture. It's about team effort at getting things done, much more so than perhaps in the older, more traditional ways of doing things. So again, these are some of the things to think about when introducing two-track IT. So this is a rail infrastructure provider over in Europe. Been around a long time, responsible for all of the UK's rail infrastructure. Very, very steady company, very conservative, would have a lot of older sort of asset management systems and ERP systems. Again, they've been around for hundreds of years. And so as they began to adopt mobile, as they made the decision to move towards mobile, they recognized that they needed to have the second track. And so they went about doing several things. One is acquiring some of those skills by means of partners, and secondly, building an offshore team that had those skills to supplement their partners and supplement their existing IT organization. So they went about it consciously, recognizing that they needed new skills to work in this new agile environment, and to be able to build this idea of an app factory where churning out new ideas and products every couple of months. So a good example of somebody who was traditionally very, very conservative, embracing this idea of agility and having both tracks operate in parallel. And so then we move on to the third point, is about collaboration. Very often what we see in organizations is a silo-based thinking, or as one person liked to call it, cylinders of excellence. But the whole idea that an enterprise mobility itself has been around for years, but generally it was very much a silo-based. So if I wanted 10 years ago to mobilize my service technicians, I bought a silo application that specifically did service techs. It probably ran on some sort of legacy device, maybe a very robust device, but I couldn't use the same system to help me with my customer service people or my sales people. And so we've moved away from that silo-based thinking to now one much more of horizontal thinking. So we've moved to where line of business is driving the use cases. One, we're sharing tools and setting up back-end connections and APIs. So we're sharing all these things amongst the organization. And the role of IT becomes that of helping organizations to select tools within the business. We're centralizing security and policy management. So again, the role of IT in this new organization could be to centralize these things and still allow the line of business to build their own apps, but with a centralized security. Centralizing perhaps some of the back-end integration and API management as well, and providing things like analytics and lifecycle management. So these are some of the ways implementing, the cloud-based architecture so that the business can push out their own apps themselves. So this is sort of how we're seeing agility collaboration move in, is by creating a new way of working between the traditional IT and the line of business that allows this collaboration to take place, has clear responsibility for what IT should do and what line of business can do. And now finally, to don't complicate, the simplicity of the app. One of the most important points about apps that work really, really well tends to be the fact that they're very simple to use. Our idea of an app in the web world had lots of different features and functions. Our idea of an app in the mobile world is one that does one thing only or two things, but does it really, really well. And so the whole key to success in mobile apps is not to complicate things, is to simplify the process, simplify the steps. That's really what it's about. That's where the biggest bang for the buck comes, is by making sure that we don't just take what's there today and put it on a smaller screen, but we use it as a way of reinventing the process, of simplifying the process. Maybe on the web we had 40 fields that a user had to fill in, but in mobile we can bring that down to 3 or 4, thereby simplifying the process and getting the rest of the information somewhere else, right? But the whole idea is to simplify things. That's really what makes mobile excellence. And this is a good example. One of our clients, again, in the UK, they were used to working with these old, robust, hardened devices. Their old system ran on sort of an older Windows 6.5 type version, but they were never really used. And they admitted it themselves, and the organization revamped their whole mobile strategy. They bought Samsung Galaxy devices. They gave them to the workers, and they said, by the way, if you look after this in 2 years' time, you'll get to own it. So they, with that one step, eliminated all of the issue of breakages and what would happen if the workers ended up looking after the devices. But what they did was they simplified the process and made the buttons very big. They simplified the workflows. They made it very visual. They introduced pictures and photographs. And above all, they worked with the mobile workers themselves to actually design the system. And the consequence was they actually ended up having huge productivity improvements through use of the devices, so much so, in fact, that they uncovered all sorts of other issues with regard to the back-end systems because everybody just used the device to input the data. So a really good example of how, with a well-designed, simplified application involving users in the process, can lead to a significant increase in productivity. So there's some examples of 4 key takeaways. I'd like to just leave you now before we go to Q&A, just talk about the Feed Henry platform. We have what we call a next generation mobile application platform. It's designed to help organizations with the end-to-end development, deployment, and management of mobile solutions. It includes functionality for app development. It allows an organization to choose any toolkit they want to build apps natively, to build them hybrid, to build them using HTML5, so it supports all of the different types of building the app. It allows third parties and design agencies to work in the system, so it has this idea of collaboration underpinning everything so that we can separate the app development from the integration to the back end and the management of it. It has an MBAS, mobile backend as a service, where we provide the integration points and out-of-the-box APIs for the apps to use, thereby speeding up app development and encouraging reuse across the organization as organizations build and extend their MBAS APIs within the company. It has a cloud deployment model, so we have a completely hosted multi-tenant version that runs in the cloud, or we can provide a private cloud on-prem solution depending on the customer requirements. But the whole idea of cloud deployment means we use the concepts of PaaS and agility so that deploying a new app can take seconds rather than hours and days. We provide tools for fast prototyping and simple forms-based apps, which have been provided very effective for both prototyping, but also for taking paper-driven processes and quickly turning them into mobile-centric data capture applications. And again, the system is underpinned by security from end to end and supports lifecycle management, the whole versioning process of building and launching many, many apps within the platform. So this is what Feed Henry by Red Hat is. It's the leading mobile application platform. For more information, please come and see us email us at mobile@redhat.com, or download our latest ebook called The Mobile Dozen at feedhenry.com and go to our resources site. So with that, I'd like to maybe open for any questions, Vance.
Cahal, thanks very much. A great session. Really good examples of how folks are getting into an enterprise-class mobile application lifecycle with Feed Henry by Red Hat. And we do have some questions, both from the business side as well as the IT or architecture side. So with your permission, let's go to those questions.
Sure.
So, Cahal, let's start with this one. You mentioned a couple of times this idea of the app factory, and folks really like that idea, the idea of getting things done quicker and getting them out there so people like them. And here's one of the questions that comes into that. This app factory is something we've been targeting for a year or more. And while it sounds like agile development, provisioning is the piece that gets in our way. It's our biggest obstacle. Are there pieces in the Feed Henry platform architecture that would help us with getting from development to provisioning?
I think Vance raised a very good point, and it goes to almost this idea of two-track IT. It's not just about developing apps. In fact, we would argue that building apps can be very cheap and can be very, very fast. Generally, the biggest issue tends to be the integration of those apps with back-end systems, the provision of correct APIs to provide the information, or as you say, the provisioning of the app and the launching and deployment of it. So we think that that really speaks to organizations need to think about introducing not just new app development, but introducing new ways of deployment, and that's where cloud and platform as a service come in. They allow and they help organizations to move to that continuous deployment model in parallel with speeding up development. And that's what the Feed Henry platform is. It's an entire mobile platform as a service that once it's set up and configured, allows teams to quickly deploy themselves, deploy apps, and get them running within days. We had one example, Vance, if I can just digress for a moment. One of the Network Rail example I spoke about earlier, they had very severe flooding last year in the UK around the springtime. And so they needed to get information fast about parts of the track right across the United Kingdom that was flooded. And so using the prototyping part, the forms part of the platform, they were able to build and launch an app in 8 hours. They deployed it to the field right across the UK to the mobile devices. And within that time, they were able to start taking photos of the submerged track, have a drop down for notes to be added, geolocation tagged, and get that information back into the system. I mean, to be able to do that within a day, that's what we're talking about. And they could do that because they'd gone down this journey of putting the right infrastructure in place, changing their processes, enabling business to be more agile. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about even in the most conservative companies, once they have introduced this concept, they can do things like that within a day.
Wow, very good answer. And you talked about this teamwork or the ability to collaborate across silos. A question here comes in about that. When the speaker suggests that we need more collaboration, is he suggesting that we should perhaps mobile optimize our traditional SDLC for mobile apps?
I think it's more than just optimizing a traditional software development lifecycle. It's actually thinking about it differently. And so as we've seen mobile emerge in the enterprise, what enterprises have understood is that there's different skills needed to do different parts of the project. So for example, the skill set to build a very, very good mobile app is really all about user interface skills, about UI, UX design, and it's about rethinking a process and simplifying a process. Those are completely different skills from the ability to integrate with an existing legacy, maybe back-end system. And so the idea that a single app developer does everything is now gone. We don't think about that. Today we think about a team developing the client side that are really focused on the UI, UX experience, a team that is focused on maybe setting up standard services and publishing them for self-discovery, and then a team maybe focused on some of the cloud logic and building some of those integrations using technologies like Node.js for lightweight integration. So what we're seeing here is a collaboration of different teams with different skill sets, very often in different geographic locations. So in large companies, I know of one pharmaceutical company where their offshore mobile client-side team is in Poland, right, where they have traditional IT in the US or in the UK. It's a collaboration of those teams across geographies as well that we're talking about here. And that's the new way of working. It's teams getting together to build something and launch it quickly. We know it works in the open source world. We know what communities can do, particularly in Red Hat. You know, Red Hat's a leading open source company. We have millions of open source projects, and we see what collaboration can do across geographies. It's bringing some of those ideas to the enterprise. I think that's what we want to see.
Wow, that's a really mind-bending answer. Really great. It could open up a whole conversation called Great Answer. Here's a theme we've heard throughout the day. In fact, we hear it over the last year or more, and it's this whole conversation about MBAS. This question simply says, can the speaker please articulate some of the features that Feed Henry brings to its MBAS? We're a bit confused by this space.
Good question, and there is a lot of, let me call it, FUD in the marketplace today from all sorts of companies sort of jumping on particular bandwagons. The whole principle of the MBAS, right, was the idea that certain features or functions were pre-built, mainly using server-side and more complex things like, you know, user management or push notifications or caching, that these functions were actually built and then exposed as usable APIs for client-side developers to use. So the idea was you would have a team of enterprise developers build something that integrated multiple complex parts within the company. But as far as the client-side developer, the mobile app developer, they just got this one little API that they called, and they didn't have to worry about how it all worked. And so the idea of the MBAS is actually to speed up client-side development by having these difficult things there and in a format ready to go for the client-side developer to be able to find it, discover it, consume it, understand how it works. And that's really what the MBAS is. And so the standard features and functionality range from user administration to push notifications to data sync. But we see all sorts of new features and functions come in. And in fact, in the Feed Henry platform, we allow the organization themselves to set up their own MBAS APIs and publish them within the organization so that if somebody solves a problem, that could be get customer account number from 5 different systems. Solved once and it becomes a publishable API that any app developer in the organization can use that, and they don't have to worry that it's integrating with an old ERP system, an old database, you know, a new system, Salesforce.com. It has solved that problem so that the developer just can call it and use it and not have to worry. And that's what MBAS really is. That's what it's designed to. And I think there are a number of good products in the marketplace. We happen to think that the Feed Henry product has been acknowledged to be the leading one, but it's helping solve those difficult problems. That's what it's all about.
Wonderful, wonderful. You know, speaking of the idea of customer success, you mentioned another architecture feature called the idea of the API. The question here says, what percentage of mobile app integration or mobile app security is now provided by simply using APIs or services that are exposed to the front-end developer?
Well, most mobile architectures are based around sort of APIs. The question is actually whether or not the API exists within the organization or whether it has to be built using, let's say, a server-side technology such as Node.js. So I'll give you an example. So go into any kind of a modern system like Salesforce or even an SAP. Very often they're publishing and exposing now, particularly through HANA, they're exposing web APIs or APIs that can be called by the mobile app. But if you want to integrate with maybe a legacy system, that system was never designed to be accessed by a mobile device, and particularly not thousands of mobile devices at the same time from outside the firewall. What you've got to do in that situation is actually build that API and turn that legacy system into what looks like an API. And that's the power of Node.js, the server-side technology that we use. It can turn a legacy system into what looks like a modern REST API producing system. And that's really the power. Then we take away that complexity from the client developer, and they can focus on, as we said, building the best user experience possible.
And just to circle back on these last couple of questions, Akal, it does sound like what you're saying is that Feed Henry is architected that it gives you the best of a cloud-based or an off-premise MBAS, but it also gives me the benefit of being able to almost configure or customize an internal MBAS or an internal way to use powerful APIs to get to my on-premise traditional software and data resources.
That's exactly right. It's about making things possible. To be honest, the way it's been doing that is because it's using the right architectures. It's using things like cloud. It's using things like REST APIs. It's using the most popular languages like Node that are very, very versatile. It doesn't tie you into any proprietary way of doing things. It's open technologies, and it's back to that open technology story. You get the best of both worlds when you take an open technologies approach.
You know, given your heritage here in the open environment and now as a proud member of the Red Hat portfolio, a couple of questions come in about openness, and specifically they say, how much of the Feed Henry platform is open, and can the speaker comment about what open source project he finds most useful for mobile?
Good question. In fact, it's kind of an interesting one because Red Hat generally work by taking community projects and turning them into hardened enterprise solutions that the enterprise can be confident in using. So generally they start with community and open source and move to product. Feed Henry is actually moving the other way around. We came from an enterprise product based on open technologies, and one of Red Hat's principles is we will open source it, and that's an announcement we'll make later this year, is that we will be open sourcing various components of the platform. But Red Hat have a philosophy that all of their products should be open sourced, and I think it's a great philosophy, and got some work to do to get it ready, but that's what we plan on doing.
Wow, that is exciting. Breaking news here at Mobile IT Summit. Excellent, excellent. You know, I see time is just about up, Cathal, but one thing before you go, are there ways that our attendees can kick the tires or get a more drill-down demo or even a POC view of the offerings you've got right now?
Yeah, we've got a huge resource library of getting started videos. People can go to the documentation site and read all about it, how it works, how the MBAS APIs work. We have lots of videos and so on. So there's lots of ways in which they can find out more information. A good starting point is to go to feedhenry.com. We still have our Feed Henry website. Go to feedhenry.com and go to the resource part of the library, and you'll see lots of videos and lots of content there that will help people get started. And if you have a specific request, you can email us at mobile@redhat.com.
Wow, this is great. Cathal McGloin, Vice President, Mobile Platforms at Red Hat, formerly CEO of Feed Henry. Thank you very much for a really great session and a look at not only best practices, but the new way of combining my agile development with an agile deployment architecture. Really great session.
Thanks, Vance.
And as we love to do here at Mobile IT Summit, we're going to put a slide up here with many of the resources, including those that Cathal mentioned during the Q&A, to some of the other great Feed Henry by Red Hat Resource Center assets. Thanks again, everyone.